رابا سباي ديام شارخلا رابا إيقارة إلي وخادوثة إلى قد جدا لومادا إتلان خامنياني اتآطوراي من أثرة آشور كد شروكيني جدا لومادا خامندي علتت إيقارة إلى وخادوثة سبب أخنان آطوراي جالوثة كماد بلخخ بالخاناني ليها ويني لطيمة ولطعمة دلا والتا وشقلتا وإصورة قوية من آطورايت أثرة آشور وهذه بدما قروان قاتوخون رابي روني بث يوالا من مذيتات الدك بيشقريثا نوهضرة قد مقرو قاتن أما مرتا تخد كونايا صبروثا دوركياتا وشورايا بشرارة دوركياتا رابا الصاية نجو صبروثا لا هر من جيبا صبرايا بل من جيبا تشعيثنايا سبب رابقة ومياثة جو تشعيث دينوية بدايو بدياي بورخا دوركياتا رابي روني إلى هالشايث ملبانا جو مدرشة أكد سوريايثا جمديتة إدك وقنية إلى الدرغة دبكالريوس من كلانيثا دباول توديثا وبيلاسوبية ومبار هذا قنية إلى درغة ماجستير جو لشانة شيماية باوة تشعيثا ومردوثا وأديا أب إلى يالوبا الدكتوراه جو فري برلين فري يونيفرسيتي أديا أخونا يقيرا روني مرق ليبخ ودانا كريثيلا اتلوخ السري دقيقة قد ما قروت ما اتلوخ والصرا دقيقة بتهاوي قابو قاره فقد يقرأ رابي روني
من دي قما يا ربي سمير هاوتراب بس مال داها مقروتو واتلقوا بالطيبوثة قورتا من بروفيسور دكتور أفرام يلدس قازمينوثة قالا قد هل بتخني بشوراية اتبل خانا ينقريانا قد قم شايدنا قد مقروخ خسامة زورة من كل خانة بي اتش دي اديو مقروخ ليقو دا كونفرنس وشلامي وقارقة كل آن تيلا مطيوة قدا كونفرنس وشلامي قارابي شابو تلا اوت إلى مدبرانة وملباني التيوة وقو ماستر وهدية إلى قو بي اتش دي هل مشارنا يعني مشارن الملوئي بتصبروث الدوركياثا وشوراي هل شوراي بهم زمن ايميل مشوريثا وبرهادخ ماطخ هل ماني لأون أو قما إديوما جو صبروت دوركيات تخجبني لها الإديوما إلى دوركتا إلى قمت هالإديوما وبش أتقتا هل بد من دار قما تمشي خايوثا هل دارت اشتسر المولادة اتوالم شخياته كثيوة بلشانة السورياية كثاونايا من سبب أهل الشان إيوة لشانة مقدشة وتصبروثا إلا من باطر هذا خازخ مشاروي إلى خدا صبروثا خذتا هاي بشتا لقريثة صبروثة دوركياثة ببريشايث بشولاما الدار تشتسر المولادة وأن دوركياثة بشلون كثيوة بيد قليريقة تعيتا يعني من قمت همزمخ بتآها الصبروثة الدوركياثة بتهمزمخ كريوثة السوكالة خبر الدوركثة والبثخكمة من يادوع بريشة وبخازخ اني للشانة شلون كثيوة أن دوركياثا وماني وآني كثاوي قماية تكثولون بآها للشانة هل بتسوكالة خبر الدوركثا إثيالم جو خك مصريطات هل بت كثيوة بآثوثة كاب خازخلا لخا إلى بآثوثة كاب وخك مقاهي بآثوثة قامل والبثرعيانة خكمة من يادوعي الإثيا من شرشة شيمايا من خبرة درك هانودين علب خكم سكي يعني مو برملة مو لبلة من سبب اختمرن دوركياتا كثيوة لبلشانة سورة ليلة بلشانة كثوانايا وخك ما يادوعك أمريكا خبرت دوركثا إلى إثيا من خبرة قردايا دورك وسكال إلى تريباتي ادمخرة ختيته ولخب خازقة ملبانا فريات فاضل عمر جو كثاوي لكسيق لشانة قردايا وجرمنايا مدخورة لك خبرة ديروك هانودين تشعيتا ين تونيثا كثيوة بلشانة جرمه لبد قششتا ين ارتسيلونك ومدخورة لك ثاوة التشعيت تصبروثا برسيتا A History of Persian Literature كتلقب إزدناية باش قري خبرة جن ديلوك ين جن ديروك أتشت زمرة إيلقا أوليثا ين جننتقا ميثا وبخازق خبرة دوركثا بيشة لمتخرة الجب تيادورس بركوني أو ويا لين خيل بدورة 8 المولادة ومدخوري لقو كثاو دي اسكوليون هانودين ملبانوثا إيمن همزومي لبوت هراطيقوثا الدستاية كدبيمارة أمرين بزميرات هون هانودين دورك أنا دستاية بخلتا هاي تقارلا أدركثا على الخراشاثة يعني سوكالة خبرت أدركثا إلى زمرتا من دي مشرورة لا قالن خدا صرتا الدركياثا آيت إيواوا جوبث تمرخ جو كتولوك أرمي رقمة أمه وقطة مدخورة له بمارة صرتا بيشتا لكثوت بشتت ألبا وشوامة وإسرو خمشة المولادة بيد قشيشة أبلحد من قوطانوس كت مدخورة له بمارة كثاو الدوركياتا دم دبرانوثا ادمكتوان قشيشة يوسف تلكيبة على مدبرانوثا وعلى الشرارة قليا وبوشق ملة ونوهارت كلهم مثل دمارا بدوركياثا يعني بدوركثا هانودين كثاويلة بزمرتا باين سميث مدخورة لقو كثاوت لكسي قندية وبيواويلة سوكالة خبر الدوركثا إلى مشختا هل بد دوركياثا بشنو كثير بلشانة همزمتا يعني لشانة عما قد باش مبرمية من سبب لشانة السورياي إيوا لشانة تغصد عيتا وأهل لشانة ذيوالة بالخوث قليريقي هل بت لشانة تمزمتا بيشة لقرية بشمانة بريشة أخت مدخورة للخا لشانة خاثة لشانة أرامايا خاثة لشانة آثورايا وين لشانة تمرخ كلدايا ين لشانة سوادايا ين تفليحي ين لشانة سورث أو شما بش قبيلة ومبلخة جيب عما إلى لشانة سورث وخرعيانا برصوبايا كت خبرة دوركثا إثيالة من لشانة قردايا وليلة من لشانة خرينا والبثرعيانا برصوبايا هلبت دوركياثا إيوا وبشورايا سبثناي أخت متخرن قمدانا ومن باطر هذا بشلي كثيوة أتشت زمرة خرينا قطوسة تمرخ زمرة راوي لليانا وزافا ودوركثا إيوا أخت متخوريلا خكمة من أوهاثن قد شوعيثة زمرتا يعني قصة مغنات سبب لو الدوركياثا إيوا تودي ثناية أخ شعيات قديشة والنوية وشوق منها اتلن دوركياثا بطبلاشة وموتان تويلون بدعوة كدوركياثا بيشي وزميرة جو مثواثة بخلتا سبب قمتا يطيتون جو مثواثة لتوخى تلفزيون خراديو واتوخى برصوبة يعني خناشة قورب شنة واللي بقصتياثا وزامروا على أن قصتياثا وأن دوركياثا اتوالا كيلا وقابيثا وبخازة خكمة من دوركياثا بيشة لكثيوة على الكيلا شويعايا وتمينايا وعسيرايا وترعسيرايا وشكل وتبخازة كاتاوي مشاروي إلي دوركياثي خمشة ين اشتباته ومن باطر هادخ متممي الدوركثا هل شو لاما بأربعة باته ونيشت كاتاوي مكثوياتي هالبت إيواقا مقويتت هيمانوثا ومن قمت همزم خلبت لخبت كاثاوة قد ما يدوركياثا بعاي وقت لخب متخرخ كد منيانة كاثاوي الدوركياثا دبين دارت اشتسر هل دارت تشسر أنا دم صيلن دم كبشخلن من سريطات بريشة هل اديم يوما من يعني إلي ثلاثي كاثاوة دوركياثا من آني كاثاوة قماية إلي مرخنانيشو الدروستاقة تشمزدن إسرائيل القوشاية هرمس القوشاية ويوسف جمال الدين من تلكيبه وإبراهيم من أثرة خومة وشركي هل بتلخى بتمشارن وياون خطوسة من داني كثاوي قماية تخج بنا لهل الدميومة إلى أو كثاوة قماية قو صبروثة الدركياثة أو تقيلة مارخ نانيشو مترابوليطة شمزدين أو تخيلة قدارة تشتسر المولادة ويوا مترابوليطة بنيثة شمزدين ونخجبنتها لدركثة ادمرخ نانيشو هاي دركثة بوش عتقتا قو صبروثة الدركياثة هل الدميومة ودركثة كثيوالي بشيتة ألبا وخمشامة وطشيخال مولادة هاي إيواوا بت موتانا برسلي قو بنيثة شمزدن وخضروانا بهاي عدانا كت دركثة خوشة 35 باتي إلا باتا قد ميتا ادمشختا تلقتيلا ولخا مدخوري لقشيشة ياقو ريتوري قو برقت دركثة بمارا دركثة كثيوالي من غدا صرتا هاد إيوا قو بيثوثة مرشمون باطريركة عيتد مدنخة بعدانة صخبرتي الماتت خوشانس صرتا إيلا ادم يوما قو بثأركت أو هذا دومينيكاية وتخط رقمة DFM 83 وشوة وآب مدخوري لهيلين مونا فاندربيرغ قو كثاوة كاثاوي وكثوياثة عيتد بدنخا بين 1500 هل 1805 كت دركثة قومة هوية كثوتا بيت مارخنا نيشو تشمزدن هاو تخيل بدارة مانسر المولادة اللي أخنن مشرورة وقت دركثة موتانا إلى كثوتا بشيتة 1500 وطشيخال مولادة من سبب إتلن رابة سبابة ومني نغزة قمايا بيثوثة بثمار خنانيشو قيمة لقاوي ترسر مطرابوليطة وأمينايت بيثوثة شقلتة لشمت مار خنانيشو درستاقة شمزدن بقارخ لهلبت أمينايت قو سريطاثة سورياثة بريشة نغزة دتري قو ختامة دركثة موتانا مدخورة لكاثاوة دركثة مار خنانيشو كتبشتا لكثوتة بشيتة 1000 تري اليوناية هانودين المولادة 1500 وطشيخا وباي عدان اتوا مطرابوليطة تخد شما مار خنانيشو وكرسي داها مطرابوليطة ايوا قوماثت مار بيشو ومدخورة لمار خنانيشو قوم شوخته كتبيمارة نسيونا انبلب والكاني هانودين أثرواثة بلشان التركاي هلبت ومذيناثة يعني منايدي لخم بيلي لأها موثانا قو طوراني ودشياثة مدخورة لباثرة هذا بمارة برشخنا دنخلة بطورة وبدشياثة يعني مشوري لهم طوراني وصلي المثواثة عن تيو قو دشتا وبرمخ من مدي كد موتانا لا بالخد قو طوراني برسلة إلا أب قو دشياثة وقام شررت داها موت عنوثة مدخورة إلى صرتت باريس BNF طلام وشويخة كتقاوخ زيلن خمدراش أخلتها
سوري مال
تنبين من ين اتيا شدانيا لا
باقد روني
اوكي اخت متخري لخا قد قصرتت باريس BNF طلام وشويخة زيلن خمدراشا بيشي كثيوة بيت مار يوسف ابسقوبة غازردا زوديتا على شوناية مر إلية قاثوليقة باطريركة مدنخا بشيتت 1500 وطشيخا هرب دانا وأوت إيوة وأخونة مرخناني شعنا طورة كرسيد مدنخة وآهم مدراشة مدخورة لقاوي داخي برسلة موتانا بشتت 1500 وطشيخال مولادا وبعلف داها موتانا من يوخي لمرأة ليقات وليقة باطرير كد مدنخة آب داخي آها موتانا برسلة برابة من قرية ومذيناثا ومثل من يانا ربا من ناشي أخت مدخورة لقو مدراشة يعني أي إلى مزبطة المندي تيلا كثيوة قودو ركثة مرخناني شعدو رستاقة أبقار قداها السرطة باريس قدامود عانوتا كد بمارة بشيتت 1500 وشوي إطشا هلبت قمدانا بترسل شنة نبلا موتانا هرب وزارة زوديتا مثل من يانا قورة من ناشي مارا مشارويلة من آمت وصلايلة مطايلة الموصل وبكل مديثة وكل أغدانا أبقى قشيشة بطرس نصري مدخوري لقو كثاوي ذخيرة الأذهان بماركة قو غدا صرت خزيالي قد بزونة مار إيليا قاثوليقا هاوت إيوا إيليا شوا فرسلة خموتان بشتت 1500 وشوي 8 يعني قمدان بخشيتا وبرسلة قازرتا زوديتا والمدخة تريرخي ومثل قاوي خمنيانا قورة من مشيخاية من مشلمانة يعني لخا قم تلتسر شنة قم دوا موتانا اتمر والا قم خدشا وبهالبت وبداها موتانا اختمرن مثل مرأة ليا قاثوليقا باتريركا ولخا بخازق داخي موتان دن بلب آها بنيثا وبنيات خرينة بشنانة مشاخلبة وبغوتاما مخوبن تأمرن هاوتن بسي مرابا المشميتوخن
بس إما رابيروني وهذه خطفاتي وأخواتي أن بوقاري راب صباين ما ردانا الرب تخمتيلا وتلندانا بس خابو قارا نتلوخم بوقاري راب صباين هاو تراب رابا بسيما رابيروني ليا مقروتوخ لث بوقاري من دي وهذه بتشوقخ داناقا آمورة ريانا اتباقذ ومقرو ما أتل المقروة هاو ترابا بسيما
هاوتن بسيما رابا هاوتن بسيما كله
Okay, yeah.
Professor Shabo. No.
Stop sharing the screen, please. Okay, thank you, Ronnie. Thank you very much.
Kibit.
Lawrence,
Laurus Nader.
you can turn your microphone and your camera.
Click on click Hassan. Shabo.
So,
Warte mal ab, wenn ich was von ihm habe.
I screen it. It's okay now?
Okay, and also your camera if you want.
Okay, I will try it for now.
so, yeah.
We are seeing your screen, okay? But also you can start your okay, perfect. Everything.
It's okay, everything?
Yes, you can start from the beginning, the slides, okay? Right now, Dr. Talai will introduce you.
So, thank you very much. As you heard, I knew Ronnie very well, of course, a student of mine. Now we are continuing with another colleague from northern Iraq and from the very nice city of Zaho. Lawrence Nader. It's actually very good that we have people from the Athra, which people say from the area, if the connection is well. So now we had a very good example of having good connection, and I hope that we will have again such a good connection with Lawrence Nader. He's from the University of Zaho. Excuse me, Lawrence, we never met, so I don't have any information about you, but the next time I will introduce you very well, I promise. So today you're going to speak about Panqitha Journal, 1951 till 1953, a study of content. So I even never heard of the Panqitha Journal, so it is a very, very important contribution and adds something new to our knowledge. Please, you have, again, 10 minutes, you said, or 15 minutes? How much?
More than, I think, Dr.
Okay, please, 15 minutes, and then we might have a question. Okay? Faqat.
I will try, okay. Okay. بس مرة ملبان من بالمياثا ميقرا مقراثا يوم بريخا لخون لقبول طيب وثقورتا قا ملبان أخونا أمتا دكتور بروفيسور أفريم يلدس قا قريتي قالي قد هاون خمشو تبانقو لمدى أكاديمية شاريرة وهرا دخلت لي قبول طيب وثقورتا قا مدبران تاها بانل ميقرا دكتور شابو طالاي أنا يون لورانس نادر من أثرى العراق من نيخون ماصل مقرون توبيك دي أو ملوها دي أو تيل تخوث مغلطة تنقيثة تيلا بلسة شتل بطشا مخمشيخة هلا البطشا مخمشي طلا دوراشة قو خويشات بخازة خويشات تاب مغلطة موم دي لي دوسوثة أي أو ملوها بينا. أوكي دكتور أوكي دكتور أهم لغة تنقيثة إيوه خام لغة يو كثير لجودية ماستر دي تخوض شمة عطرايت هكاري قعرق من شت البطشمو 33 هلا البطشمو 88 خادو راشا تشعي تنايا ناثا خازخ بارجتش السيميلي تشت البطشمو 33 أني تذو عليه خمنا معبدان ثقورت على خيثة أشوراي الكل تهارد خيثة من مردو تنايا من خيث من جيب مردو تنايا تشعي تنايا سبروتا قليون برستك يعني من كل شوية خيثة أنا قلت ثوالي خا معبدان ثقورت على خيثة أطرايخ متخرا من شد البطشمو 33 هلا البطشمو وشوي تري دي البلاطة بس كانت دي وتزدقت مردو تنايا تقا أطراي أو هي بشتسر بنيسان البطشمو وشوي تري أطراي لثوالون خم غلطة دي وبرست بو مدخط متخرا هل دي لبلطة مغلطة بلخذ خم غلطة ثوال آية دي لشمت تنقيثة دي لبلطة جو بغداد بخا اسكيما قليا لوا اسكيما رازنايا طبعا ديوا برستا جو بغداد تدي باثخ شقلخ من يعني من داها مغلطة ناثخ خازخاها مغلطة بريستلا بيت سايوم ديتي يوخنا برونت قاشا دانيال باس او دي لخياشة البوتشما 1888 هل البوتشما وشاوي طبعا بريستلا جو بغداد بلشانا سوريايا طبعا مغلطة كي خوشاوة علمنا مردوتا تشحيتا توديتا سبروتا وطبة وشاركة ملو اخيانا كي خوشاوة كي برسيوة قداها مغلطة واسكيمة ترقمت بثواثة مغلطة ايوه بريشا مغليات اخيانا قاطوسا من يانا قد مايا ايوه مشوريا من باثا قد من باثا تخا هل ترسب من يانا يعني من يانا تري براسيلي من باثا تلتسب اسكيمة ترقمت دي يمشوخبها من مغلياتها خانة من هذا خازخ أن من يعني مصيرا نتقم خازخنا طبعا جو مدخت كتوتة ماستر دي خا باسوقة من ماستر دي إيوا الخيوطة مردوتونيتة أطوراي جو عراق دي الخواشة من طلاث هلش ما يتمنى وخام ناثا من دا باسوقة إلى المغلياثة رابغ زيلي قد شمي خوا بس ومدخرة لي خكمة مطبوعة مغلطة تنقيثة برستي لبشتل بطشم وخمشيخة ها وسايما دي إيوا أو يوخان برونت قاشة دانيال بزنايا إنا ليه خزي من يعني وخويشات تاهم غلطة ومو خوشاوة قاطوس أنا مصاين قد خازن حكمة من يعني من مغلطة طبعا من يعني قد ما يتي البراسة بآذر البطشم وخمشيخة من يعني تريانا تي البراسة نيسان البطشم وخمشيخة من يعني تليثاية يوا براسب اير البوتشامو خمشوخا من يانا روي عادي بايلول البوتشامو خمشوخا من يانا خميش هادوسو ثلاقة لقم اذا قد ما صخوة كثوخ بريشدين برسخواله ومن يانا شتيثايا براسل بشوط وقادر البوتشامو وخمشتري من يانا شوي عايا يوب نيسان اير 1953 مخا من يانا خيانة البريسبشت 1950 بس لغضايا من يانا كمال دوسوثا أنا خازخ إلى فتقدمتها ومن يانا قدمت مغلطة التنقيثة دي البراسة قبضت هادر 1950 وقداها من يانا براسة لخك مملوءة إخ سايوما أو تخمار ليوخنا برون قاشا دانيال بزنايا مغزوية لنيشة بانقي ثمام ديلي وهرا دخ كثاوة لبتشعيتة ملكوثة أورهي ومدخور ومغزوية لخك ما قرياثة تيوب شدر بيت ملكة أبجر ملكايثة أورهي هايش مشيخة وهرا دخ مدخور لخك ما ملكة إتاها ملكوثة أخا سايما مغزوية لنيشة بلطة مغلطة طبعا إلى قد بارس تشعيتن ولشانا سبرايتن ومردوتن بلشانا ماسخ مره لشانا تورايا وهذا زخ خك مملوءه دي لبريس لنخراي قائمه مترجمه على بارس ولا بلشانا تورايا وهذا دخ مغزويله أن إجريات التلمشدر اللي ملك أبجر وكام قايش مشيخة وهذا دخ مدخوره قدها من يانا أنخاذ خازخ من يانا من شمان دن ملكتي لبيش ملكايثة أورهي أنا إلى من دن تفسدتي المشدر اللي ملك أبجر فراسي اللي سايما قدها مغلطها شو لامت من يانا كثاوة لخمدي بطلشانا مدخورة اللي من لا يدع لشانة آواهاتي مسلية إلي قو أثرب قو ماتي ليت لي يثرانا وعدرانا الأمتي قو ميتي وخش بنتا إلى مردوتي أو كل إيوة من يانا قد ما يتاها مغلطتي ومار لشمدية بانقيثة من يانا تريانا براسي لبنيسان شت البطشمة وخمشيوخا يعني بارخة يرخى من يانا قد مايا أنا إلي خوي شاثت من يانا تريانا ما ملو ماسخ درشخ اللي وجيب أخينا مدخورة ومغزوية صورة ماريو على أبسكوبة برور وأميدية وهرقوا دوما يانا مغزوية أو مدخورة لكثاوي خكمة طبي قاطوسا أن يختت ماريو على أبسكوبة برور عمادية قو تشرين تريانا البوتشمو خمشي هرادخ يختت مر هاول زي متروبوليتة أورميغو شوسر بادر البوتشمو خمشيخا وهرادخ من طب خينتي البراسي قدها من يانا بلينثة عمره خاتا قدهو وسنيقوث البيثقورة قو بغداد جديدة وبراخة وخلولة تري مش خداني أمريكاي قو بغداد بسيقهم تريب أير البوتشمو خمشيخا وهرا دخ من طب خيانتي لبراسي قدام من يانا إيوه خلولة داويد برعوديشو من ماتت مرزية عم إيولين براتت العزر بسيقهم يوم تخوشي بسيقهم مش تصب أيار هالبطشم وخمشي وتريه قلو من يانا تريه أنا هما شخص متخراني برسيو من يانا رابا ملوئي قوداهم غلطة مثلا بارس حكمة مديانة كوميك فوكاي مثلا كثاوة قداها من يانا ان بعد هاو تخديقا خاشعتا شتي وروي ان بعد هاو تخديقا 3 يوماني قور ان بعد هاو تخديقا 8 يوماني برم الخزورخ وخلي ان بعد هاو تخديقا هل علم هل شولاما زروع الخاقنتا ومبسوم منا هر هذا قداها من يانا تريانا مدخورة لي ان خميانا مقدمة عدانا من يود لي يصيبوثا بعدانا وبولغ لي عدانا الاسري أربا شاعت بين الليل ويوما مدخورة ايوا باولاي وهر هذا عدانا بيش المطورة قوشتت خمشم تشمو اشتوشتا مولادة بيت جيلبرت للمدخورة جيلبرت ماني بس مدخورة بيت جيلبرت وهر هذا بابا سيلفستر تريانا اتفاتيكان بيصيبوثا بعدانا أوائل من يانا تليثاية تنقيثا وهر هذا قو من يانا تريانا مدخول قو من يانا تليثاية مغزويلة خيثة ونياخت أبسقوبة مرزية سرقس تيل خيايا اشتسر تاموس البوتشم 1888 ونياخيلة خدسر بأير البوتشم وخمشي وخا أخا مصلوية اللي تري اسكيمة صلوثا تيل كثاو لبتري اسكيمة أو بشمية نفقداش شماختيث ملكوثخ وهرب إسكيما خينا بابا مش مية باش من قدش الشمو خفيا ملكوثوخ يعني ترب إسكيمة سلوثة مصلوية لقدها من يانا هر قدها من يانا ثايلة حكمة قرياثة من برصوب بريشة مشوبانا بريشة طاطوراي وشكارة وقد البراسات خمغلتا مني قرطة تروب بلبث مطران من كركوك تريب اشتال بوتشامو خمشيوخا هر هذا قاش هاوديشو اشتنايت سرسين خمشسر اشتا البوتشامو خمشيو تري شادر خا قرطة خيتاقا يوحنا برون قاشا دانيال وانا دخ داوث اسماعيل من عنزالة موصل بشادور الخاقر تخيتا بسيقوم تلتسر اشتال بوتشامو خمشي وخا هر هدخ دها من يانا تيوخ مدخوري كثاوي لخكمة بوقار وهر من جواب لأن بياد البناي قدم بوقارتي الكثاوي اللي قاطوسة أتلخ مدخور الخمشة بوقاري شراية ملت السوراية من أيكا إلى سورياية من أيكا شقلن شمي يعني يدخو بالسوريا قد معي مودي كما ستانت بط ملكوثة السورياية يعني إيوة مديتا ملكيتة ملكوثة سوريا أنا إيوة أن شوالو بناية الكثالة براس لقداها مغلطة هرا دخل خاتلن من يانا خينة براسة بأيلو من يانا رويعة بأيلول 1950 وخا ورا قدها من يانا مغزوليس يم تتبسقوبا مر سرقيس تلتسر أيار 1950 وخا ورا دخ براتي الخمشوخ تعليثو تتألها هرا دخ من طبة البراس اللي قدها مغلطة من يانا رويعة كبشتت كل عتاثة سورياية كل داي وقت مدن خا كل جو بغداد قد خازي خا شوبا قا بثقورة ومتخوبة لقتها وآخ شوبا جو بغداد جديدة ورا دخ من طب خانة البراس قدها من يانا أسيا بطرس باز هاو تخيايا جو مديتة دربت أثرت يردن طاروسي الخضرمانة قا مرعت ملاريا أخا براسي لك خمدي فكاهي خمدي مخكفانة قدام غلطة خورا باقور الخور دي بيني دانيا منيخة يعني خور ديم جوابي الأيضا تلا بختي دمختا وطليثة باقور القمول لأن خور ديم جوابي لأن دان بختي تلا طليثة دنيا اشتاق له يعني خمدي فكاهي مغزوية له وقدها من يانا البلاطة من يانا شتيثة يا البلاطة بشتى ترينتا تلا اشوط قادر البو جمو خمشي تري مغزوية اللي براسي البلاطة قدمت تهم غلطة شكله واسكيمة ملكة بريطانيا وداها من يانا براسي مغزوية اللي من يانا خميشة يتي بريسا بشت البو جمو وخمشي وخا يعني شتى قدمتها من براسة من يانا قدمايا هنا قلت باشمت لو من يانا للقياثة بإذن ورا دخ مغزوية لخا بولاغا وبالبالة البراي أتورايت أورمار خا قرداية ثايل بياشيلي يعني شق من ملوخ يعني داري حكمة تونياثا قد قرويت أها مغلطة مغزوية لخا قرداية دخل دراية بالبالة جو أتورايت ماثت أورمار طبعا أخ مدخوري لشتت ألبو طلما خمشي خاقر داي خاشل قمديت دورمار وبعد خابو البالا بين دن أطرايت يخياي قدها ماثا من الطب خانة البراسة من يانا شتيثايا مدخور من شراية شبط ألبو هل ترسر بيرخا من شبط شت ألبو تشمو خمشتري مطر ثايلة ومية خابر زيادة ليرابا مثواثا بالي لقم خسراني بسبب ريمتا 100 خابر وثيثة مطر خيلانة هر هدخ مغزوية لتونيتا يما وبرونا بيت كاثوها أشرايم شمها ميشايل العزر عيسى فرادخا مغزوية لخكمة طب آني تلت عنيدت خكمة طراية تلنياخا جو أثرى بشوبانا بريش خكمة لوغو كركوك موصل بغداد بصرة يعني ثوا يبرساوا طبق دن أطرايت يخيا غوثرا هو من يانا خينة براسة من يانا شوية بالبراسة نيسان أير بشت ألبو تشما وخمشي تري أخ مخزوي مدخور الخاتوني تخيتا دي المغزوي منتيتا وخادو تلاي بزوزينا إلى بخلمانا ومغزوي خاطوسا أخت المكثاوة جو خاطرة من تيمنا التفريق كيف وخا ناشا تيرا أو دولمان إثوى لربا زوزي بس لا يوا تيرا بت قش مدية إثوى لمرعى ستونكا أو برسو باك متيو زنجينا مثل بتكبنا قمول ين لي مصي وآخلوا هيدي هل نخلة واو إثوى للزوز يعني مخزوية من تيتا وخاذوث برناش لا إلى بزوز إنا إلى بخلمانا أم أخا مغزوية لمدخورة الحكمة ميمري وحكمة تونياتا قاتو سماري الألوخ ديماري ون يا برناشا ورادخ براسي الحكمة طبخيني سيمتت برسو بريشي لعيتت مدنخا بريشايثقا سيمتت متروبوليتا أورمي مرزي دشتو غزونات خازخ التخث من باثتها مغلتا تخمر من يانا شويعايا باثت شورين من يانا قد ما يو باثخا هل ترسر أخ من يانا شوام طايل أم أسرة هل أم وخد السر ومن يانا خينة البراسة البوتشم وخمشي يطلع ليغ ضايا خازخ من يانا كميلة للمدخور من يانا كميلة وأها من يانا سامرابا من دها من يانا البراسة شت البوتشم وخمشي يطلع بهذا اللي يصيبوها بمتوتا وسيمتت ملكة فيصل تريانا تلبياشا ملكة العراق يعني سامارابا من دهم غلطة أو أبريشاي ثو منيانا بهذا اللي يصيبوها بمتوتا ملكة فيصل تريانا تايتو بالسيمرابا
أود بسيمة رابا ميقرا رابي لورنس سبوثا رابا ألسيتا ديوذخ من دي بودية بات خزيلا أني قطر دتو على إيدانا ومهمزيمية وكتوية بودية هل إديو يوما هوخ محكوية بودية فقلت أخمنتي تنخك ما بقارك سلوخن من نوخن باين باقر نيكولاس باقت
عزيزة لورنس حاوت بسيمة رابقة دا من ديت مقرولوخ دزوت أخنن ليطخ وقت جو خمشية بني أمتا نتوالون خاهت خمغلتا جو أطرت عراق أخشي بينو بقرن وخامن دي بلكت يطد بلكت ليطد يخنن برونت قشيشة دانيال أو بخشاون إيوا بروتستانت بسبب قشا دانيال دباز رابضية وإتوالى مدرسة وقرية وقو مدرسة أمريكية إتوالى مدرسة قو ما تختيت دباز وإيوا قاشت بروتستانت
شمت نيخاني كولاس
هذه شمايل هنا ما ديلون شمايل هي
بخشاون رابي ضيلخ بقاري موديو ما استعطي بقرت له
شمي
بشماية لورنس
لين شمايل دكتور
ما هي لقطة
منامر بقارة قالوا رابي منامر قالوا خاتمور اللي قد ما صح
هي من تمام ما نتلخ هنا بقارة أتلخ هزروا قالوا
اوكي بس مرابا دا نقلوت مقروال قالا من خامد دينار في معنا وقصة ليه ضخمة وشبه خمشية اتوا مغلتا قد بني أمتا نتوالون جليونا روتا خبقارة أختي إتوالي مرو قد شمت أو رئيس تحرير إيوا يخنن برون قشاداني الدباز هل أن إيوا من أمرة بروتستانت مسب أخني يطخ قشاداني الدباز إتوا وما تختيتا قد قرية وقو شليخوت أمريكاية قو أرمي وإتوا لمدرسة قو باز يعني مقروية وهيمانوت بروتستانت قو باز فأختي آمن دي باينويتن ودوسي لين لا
يوسوثا أخت متخرخ إثوخا انقطاع بين قليونوثا طوريتا منشت البوتشاموطا ثلاثة هلتي لي هوا زدقا طوراي زدقا مردوتناي تا طوراي اشتسر نيسان البوتشامو وشو يطلع بس قدام كتاع متخرن قلاط الآن غلطة بشتل بوتشام وخمشوخا ومقروش إلى أنا قتل من يعني بيدي هل شتل بوتشام وخمشو طلاي الوايا باردقة لخزة من يعني بلكي تلم قرشتا هل باردقة إنا بت بيثوث برسو بدوثوث لخزة اللي خمصدر خزق بيثوث يدختي مدخور يوخنا برون قاشة دانيال بزنايا ليلة مغزوية خزق من ديني مريت هوا لثن خمبوها قميدا مغزويلا أو من دي هنا براسي لبخاس كما قليا جو بغداد
إن ليتن بقاري خيني أنا تلخا بقارة سورة متخرو خا ممرة دانا دقريلو خم تخري أنا وان ممرة إلي كثيوة كس خا كثاوة بوت نعم فايق كثيوة من يوحنا دولباني مرة دلا لشانا أمتا مثل أتغى من ديانة يعني أني خبراني بيد بثلاثية كثيرة لي يعني بقاري إلى هل أتوى أسيروثا بالناشد تركيا أو العراق بنك ثوياثي خازوتن طيبة من تاما
لان برمالي بقارو
يعني إتن ثوياثي بتسوراية ترعبدين أو تركيا
دوسوث هذه لقي ثقم إذا خم دي هذا أنا فترة غضار المطبوع ودراسات دي بس تركيز ديوني لن أطرع ثكرينا هل دي لخزي خم دي بود أنا برسو بايت بلكي برسو بخانة خزي لي بس أنا برسو بايت لن خزي خم دي هذا لأن أنا فوكس دي بس ويد الأطرع ثكري بود بينه شقنا مطبوعة بود جيغلا دي تينو بلاخة قاوة
اوكي هاو ترابا رابا بسيمة شلام الكل ناشن جو أطرا وزاخو وأخنن هدية جوجخ ايه يلا باي باي على منك
Isva mot Isva, Isva Hamalka.
Sí, sí, sí. Empiezo. Should I start? Okay. Los graba. Hello again. Good morning and welcome to our this session, where I have the pleasure to present you Christina Beniaminova. As you have realized, there is a huge occasion of hope. The Assyrian new generation is pushing forward. We have young scholars who are giving this sign of hope to continue what we have been working on. So counting on such talents is for us a huge honor, and also it's a necessity that our young Assyrian generation trains in this field. So this is why Christina Beniaminova, who is a graduate of the Russian State University of Humanities in Moscow, of course of the Assyrian origin, she will talk today about a very important topic at this conference, which is object markers in the modern Assyrian Aramaic dialect, the dialect of Tal. So she will for sure delight us with specific contents of such an important conference, and I'm not going to just waste her time with presenting the abstract of her conference. Now the role is yours, and welcome, Christina.
Thank you. So, all right. Yes, thank you, Rabbi Ephraim, for these kind words. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor for me, and I would like to thank everyone who make this event possible, this wonderful event. So, we were discussing lately that the first day, linguistics, classification of the languages, Neo-Aramaic and Assyrian Neo-Aramaic languages, and not only. It's a very interesting and complicated topic. So today we will come back to linguistics again to discuss object markers in the modern Assyrian Aramaic dialect of Tal, namely the subdialect of one village. As you can see, it's like you probably know that even the language of each village may differ from the other villages, and yes. So, regarding the Tal, as you probably know, the homeland of Tal dialect is situated in southeastern Turkey, in Hakkari area, and Hakkari area is very mountainous, so it creates wonderful conditions for language diversity. And yes, so at this map we can see Hakkari villages, and Tal it includes 7 villages: Bedaire, Bekuraye, Beiktha, Maravdisho, Beaziza, and Rebat. And the name of the district Tal, is traditionally connected to the cult of the Saint Martalya. Also around Tal tribe, there are others like Barvar, Diz, Jilu, Tchuma, Tiare. So, and we know that in 19th century, around in the middle, yes, Bedaire village was inhabited by 25 families. And after Assyrian exodus, Assyrians, they have to leave their homes. So one of the main Assyrian migrations proceeded to Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. The majority of native speakers of Tal dialect, and including people from Bedaire village, they found their shelter in Georgia. And most Assyrians settled around the Black Sea coast, also in Tbilisi and its suburbs. Apparently, Tal native speakers first settled in Batumi and from there disseminated throughout western Georgia to Senaki, Zugdidi, and Kutaisi. Yeah, I forgot actually to tell about. So this research took place in 2015, first time with my teacher, Alexey Kimovich Levdansky. And yes, wait a moment, I can't see it. Yes, regarding the information, what do we have about Tal dialect? Actually, it's largely unexplored. We have a fragmented description in the survey grammar of Neo-Aramaic dialects of the Assyrian of the Habu River by Shabot Alai, and there was published one oral text. So, in 2015, we found several informants, and I want to thank them for their cooperation. The first one is Avdisho Hambeshaya, born in Senaki, Georgia. Then he moved to Moscow, completed his studies on on engineering, got married and stayed there. Eleonora Hambeshaya is his sister. She was born in Batumi, and now she resides in Moscow. Varde Zaya, probably you heard about her. She's famous Assyrian singer of Rave, and on YouTube you can find her, her singing. She was also born in Senaki and lived in Ukraine, but then came back to Batumi. And Marina Binyaminova, she is native speaker of Bekuraye dialect, and she helped us a lot to clarify some complicated moments and cultural moments, so we could understand the difference between Bekuraye and Bedaire subdialects. All our informants, they speak fluently 3 languages. It's Assyrian, Georgian, and Russian. So our corpus includes oral folklore texts, Mirza Pamant and Hambeshaya, the death of Katine, the breach of Dalale, the tale about the fox, the tale about Shidda, and the Cold River. The questionnaires we used, it's the first acquaintance with a dialect by Kibrik, Swadesh word list with sentences by Debo, and tenses, mood, and aspects questionnaire by Dal. So, and here I would like to switch on the record, and you will hear the piece of this fairy tale called The Cold River by Eleonora Hambeshaya. You can hear.
Isra mot Isra Hamalka. Itfale Habrata Isfale. Brate pishta gorta. Mite garag makbirin na brati. Srikh renashe makhta ante magbira wa tama godo asray magbira wa bnase brone mite brati pishta gorta garag makbirin na machakh khatna vase. Ina ana itli khasota garag damrenin mud garag dozi.
Yes, so it sounds like that. And for me, it was interesting because actually some people asked me why didn't you study Bekuraya subdialect, because it's also unexplored. But then I heard the speech of what's going on? The speech of Avdisho Hambeshaya, and I got very curious because at that moment my Assyrian was very poor, and I didn't get much of his speech, and I decided to work on exactly on this dialect. Yes. What's going on? Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, so at this photo, there is presented the family of Hambeshaya from Georgia. So my informants, Eleonora and Avdisho, it's their grandfather who told them all the stories they told me. Yes. So, the features of Bedairi subdialect. In A suffixes and 2ms and 2 plural, they coincide. So, for example, we have Damhith in Bedaire and Damhitu in Bekuraye. Also, we observe the shift of R to DD in Midde in Bedaire and Merre and Bekuraye. Present particle he in weak verbs appears here in Hemse, for example, or Hebe. So, like, first one is he can, second one he wants. Palatalization also is an interesting feature of Bedairi, because in Bekuraya I haven't heard they have it. So they say beta, not beta, ida, not ida, and so on. This is a system of verbal forms that are presented in majority of Nina. I won't stop here. They are very basic, like common, and we will move now to we will move soon to the examples, so you will understand the meaning of all these strange words. So at last we come to suffixes. So we have L suffixes and A suffixes, and there's their paradigm. We can see that in the third person masculine for singular, we have a 0 marker, and that's important. We shall see why. And interesting thing is, I call them B suffixes. I'm not sure if I'm right. According to Shabbatalai, we can meet the suffixes in Tchuma subdialects, Mazra, Tal Hurmes, and Gundek. B suffixes are used mostly, like I heard, so only in that case, at the end of the words. But we are not sure if it's only used for third person in Bedaire or not. Because when I started working on presentation, we found many interesting things to discuss and talk about many black spots, let's say. So next time I will be in Moscow, I need to go back to my informants and ask them about this paradigm. But in our corpus, I haven't met these forms. That's important to mention. So the distribution of the suffixes looks like this. So for preterit, it's subject, the one who acts. So for this serves L suffixes, and for objects, A suffixes, and so on. Now I think that we will see that on examples. So here I think it will be more evident. So object marking in preterit and in fact. So you can see that I saw her, خزيالي, it refers to like a suffix a refers to object, her. And li, it's kind of like active, so I saw her. And in fact, you see in different situations. So خزيالي, so here she sees me. And for me, as a native speaker in some way, it's a difficult topic because sometimes I do mistakes and probably other native speakers make here mistakes too. So, in another form, preterit 1, we see the next examples. For example, so, sebutu primale, he cut his finger. So, a suffix here is an wait a second, project. Yes. So it's a object, and active it's here le. Dvikele ava chambeshaya, he caught this cannibal. And third example is with ba suffix. It's aklum cheleba dotarra. So he hit the door with his leg. And here, ba, it's third feminine, and it refers to akla, which is also feminine, so it's kind of indirect object in here. In preterit 2, we see the next situation. So, kam shaveklan achni, he left us. Ein kam machlali meddi, she fed me with something delicious. So you see, yes, object here it's in L suffixes. And again, another example with object marking. So, lam daglili, they will not betray me or lie to me. The interesting cases are here with resultative participle object marking. So let's see. Holecha menen ithya, gnivabe kulepeka. Here. So somebody has come and has stolen all the fruits. Peka is a collective name. Collective name means that it's noun that refers to some group, but grammatically singular. But in our case, the singular still demands plural. And that's a bit confusing. It may look confusing. So we have here fruit, singular, masculine, but kind of fruits. And this be, that is marker of plural or single masculine. So we are still not sure about how be suffixes mark plural, third person plural. Yes. And yeah, kule peka. Yes, and the second part of this kule peka gnive we see here. Yes, and here gnive it's plural again. So you could see that the form is singular and the participle is plural again. And infinitive object marking. So I will start with the second because it's easier, the second example. Aya brata pashoten la tlado achoni gora. I'm sending this girl to my elder brother. So L suffix, as you see, it's an object, girl, her, she's an object. And the first example, كل مودي بكتشابلبا بزالله. He's picking everything and leaving. So there is a word moody, which means think or something. And usually it's considered to be of masculine gender in Nina and yes, and in this dialect too, probably. So we see here that Bekchapaleba uses feminine marker, object marker. And if we are sure, and before that we met ba only in connection with feminine nouns. And here it suddenly is used with masculine moody. So we can, in this case, we can think that maybe moody in bedaire may be feminine. And there is an example from Barvar, from grammar of Jeffrey Hahn, that actually makes us think about that. So there is an example. Hayoma malka meret la vizir yaba tazich zalich ebrateni mamenna balkit ila mista balkit ila hamendi thisabia. So it means that let's go and see what has become of our daughter of ours. Perhaps she's dead, perhaps something has happened to her. And here we see that this mendi is used with participle, a feminine participle form. So above you see resultative participle forms is ithia for man, thitha for woman, it's singular, and ithia for both genders, plural. And at the same time, previously we see this copula balkit ile, which refers to masculine. So actually this clause puzzled me, and I would like to ask Jeffrey Hahn himself what he's thinking about this, why Mendi here is thitha. Yes. So, do we have time? Yes, so, and we came to imperative object marking at last. So it's used with L suffixes, so you can see the first form, maddi, tell me. And as I said, in Bekuraya they will say murri instead of maddi. Aya sebutuch prumla, cut your finger. Yes, so conclusions. Conclusions are very general because we are in the process of discovering this dialect, and a lot of job has to be done, as you could see. But still, Bedaire demonstrates some features that are not common for other Tal subdialects. Yes, and serious conclusions are yet to come. So, yes, thank you. I hope it wasn't very boring.
Christina, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
As you see, we become gradually much more disciplined, and we are on time to have questions upon such a beautiful work and conference. I'm sure that Professor Jeffrey Khan and Professor Shabo Talai would be much more not only interested but happy to count on Christina for the next works that they are undertaking. As you see, she is mastering a field that is absolutely needed. If we keep these dialects alive somehow, and they have done a huge work and she is working on them, then those dialects that probably disappeared will survive thanks to such a hard and excellent work. And I was very surprised about, the monophthongation of the diphthongs that take place in different dialects, and also the Tala dialect is probably one of the best examples where we can see this process really materialized. So now we have questions. I'm thankful to you to discuss, to comment as well. Yeah, please.
Oh, Jeffrey, you wanted to start? Let me just thank you very much, Christina. I realize that there are many common features with Truma and Tal. I sometimes thought Tal is very much close. I wrote actually an article which has not been published on Truma in Jerusalem. It should be published since a while, I don't know how many years, with Stephen Fusberg, Simon Hopkins and so on, but it's not published. The B suffix, as far as I can remember, it was always geminated. It's never be, it's always ibbe, or am I wrong? This was one thing. The second is many features could be due to contact in Khabur region. Now we have the possibility, due to your research, to check what was Tal originally and what was Truma, due to contact to Truma, because they will live very close to each other in the Khabur region. But your people left before they came together to Khabur region, so they never been in such a contact to Truma people as we have. So this is something we have to check carefully with my text. As you know, I have a lot of recordings. It's only a little bit published yet, but we could have, or we can check in the future as well. So thank you very much for your work. One further remark is the question of gemination in general. So when you write Aya, is this really Aya or it is Aya?
Okay.
So this is a question for me. I don't know what you heard, because for me it's impossible to say Aya and she is Aya. So usually they say Aya and Aya. So this is a question also of gemination to be checked. But I'm very thankful.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the first part regarding Truma, actually I think it's very hard to find out how dialect initially looked like, sounded like, because after the migration to Georgia, Badaraya, people from Bedaire, and Trumnaya lived very close to each other in Georgia and Senaki, and maybe probably this palatalization, because Truma also say be success, and also these B dialects, B suffixes, may also be some influence on Talnaya during this migration, maybe. And I'm not sure how we can be sure about that without any documented previously sources when people lived in Natra. So, but still, of course, we will document them and compare them. Regarding Aya Awa, I can tell you that I myself and many Talnai, they say Ava like she, Aya like she, and pronominally like that, this, that for feminine. So it's like mixing. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Professor Jeffrey, we were expecting that you would comment.
Well, I'd just like to thank you very much for this excellent work you're doing, and very important work. And this is wonderful you're able to document this very endangered dialect, and I'd like to encourage you in the future of your work. And I think you very nicely showed the basic facts of object marking very nicely. perhaps just on the B suffix, this is probably a bit more widespread than is generally thought in Nina, of marking of objects. You find it across various dialects, including the Judy area, if I'm not mistaken, the Judy dialects. So it's beyond the purely sort of that particular part of Turkey you're talking about. I mean, yeah, and this thing about Mundi being feminine, well, first of all, I'll have to check whether I got it right. I mean, I think it must be, Theta must be right, but I have to check whether I've got that copular pronoun right in my transcription. But in general, of course, the feminine singular is often used for a neuter. It's quite common to refer to a general something, neuter sort of a general situation very often, like Mindy in the sense of something, some situation. So, I mean, that's used in other contexts, just the feminine singular pronoun. So I'm sure that's some kind of reason why it's sometimes taken as feminine.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Then Professor
just was a
Dr.
question,
Nicholas Algilo.
remark.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I've grown up with Talnaye in Sydney, Australia, so you can see basically the dispersal of people from Tal, which was originally a very small valley in Hakkari that I've been to all over the world. So basically to Georgia, then Russia, and then to Syria, and even to Australia. Geographically, a lot of your description makes sense because Tal is between Truma and Tiari. So Bedare, unfortunately Wilmshurst writes it as Bede. It's not Bede. Bedare is the northernmost village of Tal, very close to Tiari. The closest Tal village to Upper Tiari. And Upper Tiari also does this midde, shwidde, so shwirre, mirre, and it's even in some songs, right? And then the bass is very common to Truma dialects. And in the Tiari dialects, it's le. So it's the object marker with the lamed. وانبذاي اللخ وانبذاي اللخ but they say وانبذاي اللخ.
Okay.
So, do you know me?
Me. Bidayatli, yes.
So in the Khuma dialects, and it seems like also in Tal, this ni has turned into a be.
Yes, that's also possible that we are witnessing this shifting period. And you can, yes, they are interchangeable, this li and be sometimes, that's truth. About Tiari, I don't know. Then it's very interesting that probably it's like common innovation for the region and they are more progressive, let's say, these dialects in a way, maybe.
Rabbi Samir the other day was saying a poem using that type of dialect. He was the midde, shwidde, he was saying, but he's not here at the moment. I would ask him to say it.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Just switch in a second. Yeah, what also I have very much liked is that in Tal dialect the fricatization process in some words like peka, where you said it's the sense of the plural, but it's given in the singular. This is very common and with the countables and uncountable processes. So
yes, actually.
Yeah, please.
It's a common feature in the languages where neutral gender is absent. So many abstract, like, I'm sorry, you were saying, I lost my thoughts. Can you repeat again?
Just what surprised me is that Peka is kept not as Feka, where many other dialects have shifted to Fa instead of Pa.
You're meaning this? Yes.
Yeah. So yesterday we got also this kind of message that in the ancient time, especially in the northern part of the Assyrian Empire, when the Aramaic language entered in an official way, such aspects have been well kept until recent times.
Yes.
And I think Professor Jeffrey Khan would agree with me that probably it's because those regions were so isolated that the influence of the Arabic or other languages was less strong than it has been the case of where there was a direct connection to the other people who were living with. No? Jeffrey, what do you mean about?
Yes, correct.
But
those valleys, those mountainous areas, especially, particularly going further to the east in Zulu parts of this, they're really the communities that are in contact with surrounding and speak with people.
Are there any other questions? Otherwise, we are going to close this session in order to jump, and let's just give a clash to Christina. Thank you very much. And the beauty of this Congress is we jump from a field to another one. Probably you have been surprised that this year we have included some specific topics that one would say, well, why have they been included in such typical linguistic, historical, but identity, cases? I'm pleased to present to you our next speaker, Professor Michel Chamon-Pour, who surprisingly is dealing with a topic which has to do also, why not, with what we are really discussing on. Assyrians are Assyrians even in the sense of the genetics. So we are going to move to a field which is, in my opinion, also important. But first of all, if you allow me, I'm going to give some very short points upon the bio of our Professor Michel Chamon. Is a molecular anthropologist specializing in population genetics and paleogenomics. He is a research assistant professor with the Binghamton University first-year research immersion program. His research primarily focuses on the genetic histories of the Middle East and Caucasus population. Chamon-Pour has worked with members of Assyrian communities in the United States to reconstruct genetic matrilineages and patrilineages of pre-genocide Assyrian settlements. A microbiologist by training, Chamon-Pour's research also includes the diagnostics of limb diseases. As an educator, he emphasizes the health impact of socioeconomic disparities and systemic racism in the United States. As you can see, we are jumping really to a field which has not been yet developed among the linguists, but why not also counting on such an exotic in relation to what is the fact of philology. I'm thankful to you for accepting our invitation to participate in such a Congress, and he will delight us with the title of Assyrian Identity in Genomic Era, what paleogenomics and population genetics can and cannot tell us. Please, the role is yours.
Habitu Rabbi Basima, Rabbi Ephraim, thank you very much. Shlam alochun. I'm going to give this talk in English, and I'm going to try to. So basically, I'm going to try to provide you briefly with a summary of the findings so far on the genetics of Assyrians, and also talk a little bit about what we know about the genetics of ancient people of the Middle East, particularly Mesopotamia. And I'm glad to share with you the first report of the genetics of people from ancient Nineveh, which I think is very relevant also to the topic today. Like Dr. Ephraim mentioned, Professor Ephraim mentioned, so a lot of talks so far have been about linguistics, looking into the history. So I'm hoping that this would be a good addition, a complementary to the other studies that we discussed before to understand our history better. Very briefly, I understand that many people by now have contributed or have actually purchased, I have to say, genetic ancestry testing that provides individuals with a summary report of their genetics. It usually includes some information, so I want to clarify terms genomics, which refers to our genomes, basically means the entirety of the genetic data, basically genetics of an organism or an individual. There are also mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA, and Y chromosome. mtDNA is used as the genetic component representing maternal lineages. In other words, since it's exclusively inherited from our mothers, so if you look into individuals' mtDNA, you can look at the maternal lineage of that individual. Parallel to that, Y chromosome can work as the genetic indicator of one's paternal lineage. So those of you who have contributed to these kind of ancestry testing probably have received a report that has told you that you have haplogroup X or Y or Z for your mtDNA or Y chromosome. Haplogroup is in reference to the clade of basically closely related genetic lineages of mtDNA or Y chromosome. So I understand that this is not enough time to brief you on how the genetics works, but I'm doing my best to provide some basics. But getting to the point, the field of population genetics basically uses genetic information to inform us about the history of populations, right? So you look into the genetics of individuals as representatives of populations, and that provides an opportunity to examine hypotheses that we can have based on linguistics, based on history, tradition, archaeology, etc. Now, the population genetic studies are different in terms of the type of data that they use. As I mentioned, mtDNA, Y chromosome, or your entire genome. Some of them use really small data, the others draw on very large data. Sometimes entire genomes of individuals is included. There are also different types of analysis, but what is important, and I hope that one of the take-home messages today is that, like any other field of sciences, population genetics is, prone to errors, but more importantly, it has its own limitations. So it's limited by the data size, but also, more importantly, we need to remind ourselves that if you look into a population or an individual's genetics, you can only look into that individual's biological history, right? So, which is obviously very often separated from the other histories. But again, if there is one message to take, if I wanted you to remember one thing about population genetics, is that it has proven to be, interestingly, a powerful tool in the sense that it can represent, as I'm trying to show you in this study, this image from a study from 2008, one of the first large-scale studies of population genomics. We have learned that in most parts of the world, the genetic of populations correlates with their geography. And that shouldn't surprise any of us, right? So people who live closer to each other, their genetics are also closer to each other. Does that make sense? So for the most part, genetics is an indicator. Now, like I said, I'm going to provide you with a brief summary of some of the findings of the genetics of Assyrians as a population, I'm going to be drawing on studies that I have contributed to. And I'm going to briefly mention this particular study of mine, which only looks into the mtDNA, the maternal lineages of Assyrians, by focusing on a certain mtDNA haplogroup called HV. And this is a lot to look into, but I just, like I said, I'm trying to introduce you to the concepts, and of course you can look into these publications and read on them. But to provide you with a brief kind of a summary of the findings, when we look into the Assyrian population's mtDNA, again, not surprisingly, we find a lot of similarity, a lot of shared lineages with our neighboring populations, other populations of the Middle East, but also particularly a lot of close similarity with Armenians. In other words, Assyrian lineages cluster most with Armenian lineages. It seems so far that we have a lot of shared ancestry, or perhaps this is, to at least some extent, results of interactions between the populations. These are things that we are still looking into. Another exciting concept is paleogenomics, or ancient DNA. Some of you are nodding, so I think you have heard of the term before. It simply is what it sounds like. It is the study of the genetics of people from the past. In fact, ancient DNA is about genetic information from any, let's say, organism from the past. So it could be animals, it could be plants, it could be bacteria, but of course here we're going to be talking about human ancient DNA. As you can imagine, it is very challenging. It means that you need to extract DNA from human remains, usually skeletal remains. So of course, everything depends on the level of preservation. So in certain types of climates and conditions, we have better preservation of DNA, so higher success rates. In some other cases, it could be extremely difficult, in fact, often impossible to get any DNA. But of course, when we get DNA, it is almost, I always compare it with forensics, right? You can say exactly that this individual whose remains we are studying from this place and this time, this was their genetic data, right? Which can even tell us some things about their phenotypes, meaning their features. Sometimes we can basically decipher the genetic information to tell things about what an individual looked like. Or for instance, if they could, if they were lactase persistent, meaning that if they could drink milk or not, and so on. I'm going to start by a brief summary of the study by Lazaridis et al., 2016, that I played a small part at. And I'm going to get back to this picture, but I'm using this just to kind of report to you that by the time of this study, we started getting a good picture of the ancient genomics of people from Iran, from South Caucasus, from the Levant, and also from different parts of Anatolia, but nothing from Mesopotamia. But what we learned at that point was that the genetics of people from Levant, Anatolia, and Iran basically are quite distinct, or at least were distinct around Neolithic time. Neolithic meaning New Stone Age, but this is basically 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, roughly. So it seems like people at that time from these three regions were quite distinct genetically. Interestingly, people of the Neolithic Armenia, as you can see in this image, were more closely related or more similar to people of ancient Iran compared to the Levant or Anatolia. Another thing that we learned from these studies are that as time has passed, populations have become more similar to each other. So in the Neolithic times, people from these three regions were quite distinct. But as time passes, they become more similar to each other. In fact, by Bronze Age, they are very similar. By Iron Age, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish individuals from some of these populations, and I will get to that quickly. But how about modern Assyrians and other contemporary populations of the region? This is a principal component analysis, or PCA image. All you need to know is that each of these symbols represents the genetic data from one individual belonging to a certain population. If you zoom in, so I tried to draw that red line kind of around where Assyrian individuals that we included in this study fall on this plot. They're represented by those upside down green triangles, okay? Briefly, as you can see, there is a lot of overlap. Please note, and I'm using this again to kind of like bring to your attention, that we don't have those distinct lines or borders in our genetics that distinguishes people from different ethnic or linguistic or religious groups. But there are some patterns from time to time. Now, here, if you take and I understand it could be difficult, but you can look this study up, Lazaridis 2016, and access all of these for free. You will note that individuals from Armenian population, as well as some Jewish, Iranian, and also Georgian Jews, seem to be even more closely situated to Assyrian individuals than other populations which are also somewhat close to Assyrians, including people from Turkey, people from Iran, and some other neighboring populations. I think this is probably more interesting to most of us, trying to answer the question of where contemporary Assyrians fall in relation to ancient individuals. So I'm showing you again that picture from 2 slides ago, where you have Chalcolithic Iran, so Copper Age Iran, and Armenia individuals. And right there, contemporary Assyrians, about 15 Assyrians in this study, they fall somewhere between those people from ancient Armenia and ancient Iran. Note that at the time of this study, we did not have any individuals from northern Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia. But that is kind of changing now. In fact, last year, one of the greatest, largest studies so far of ancient genomics, again led by Lazaridis, looked into over 700 individuals from the ancient world, mostly Anatolia and the surrounding. And for the first time, we were able to get results from only a couple of individuals from Nemrik, the site of Nemrik, which is just north of Mosul and Nineveh, as well as one individual from Mardin, and a couple of individuals from Shenidar in Zagros Mountains. So, not surprisingly, the genetics of these, and you are seeing 3 Mesopotamian individuals here in green, they fall somewhere between ancient South Caucasus, ancient Armenia and Azerbaijan, and ancient Zagros. It shouldn't surprise us, right? So it kind of makes sense because they lived somewhere close to both. Nevertheless, it's still kind of interesting to see more of a similarity perhaps than some might imagine with South Caucasus individuals perhaps than people from, let's say, west of the northern Mesopotamia region. I understand this could be also a lot, but also using these images to prove a point that the results of these kind of studies are not that straightforward. They're open to interpretation, and of course, there are dozens of different types of analysis that can show us different things. But here in green, and those numbers representing percentages roughly, we are seeing that, for instance, people from Neolithic Armenia, people from Neolithic Zagros, site of Shenidar, they seem to be extremely similar to those ancient individuals from Nemrik and Mardin. Somewhere between 70 to what seems to be roughly 100% of their genetics seems to be similar. As I said at the beginning, now I'm excited to share with you that we have for the first time genetic report from ancient Assyria, and perhaps even better from the city of Nineveh. I would like to start by mentioning that this study was made possible by the efforts of Mona Malik and Dr. Robert Karukian, which really helped putting the study together. The late Dr. David Stronach from Berkeley, who had excavated many sites in Mesopotamia and Iran, including the city of Nineveh, had discovered some skeletal remains at the site of one of the gates of Nineveh called Halsey Gate, with a map here pointing at the position of Halsey Gate at the basically southeastern quarter of the ancient city of Nineveh. Now, of course, it's very exciting and interesting to get any kind of genetic information from ancient Nineveh, but this site is particularly unique because what we are looking at is about a dozen individuals who were buried when when the Halsey Gate, the gate itself collapsed and fell on these individuals. There is clear indications of basically warfare, if you will. We can be pretty confident that what we are looking at are the individuals who died at the moment that the city of Nineveh was attacked at the site of Halsey Gate. So I can tell you that with high confidence that we are looking at what happened at the summer of 612 BCE, at the time of the fall of the Nineveh. The genomic work for this study, which has been completed, but we are still working on finishing the publication, was done at David Reich's lab at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Arya Schaus has been the main person basically working on the genetic analysis, and Arya and I are currently working on writing the manuscript that we hope will be published in the next few months, sometimes in the next few months. But to provide you with some brief report, and understand that these codes doesn't mean much probably, but any of you who have contributed to those kind of ancestry testings might recognize these code names as the names of the clades or lineages of mtDNA representing maternal DNA. So we got this result from 7 individuals, which basically, regardless of what those codes mean, it tells us 2 things. First of all, 7 different individuals, each of them had a distinct lineage, belonged to a distinct lineage. So we don't have any shared lineages there. As you can imagine, that suggests a lot of diversity, which I don't think should surprise us, right? Nineveh was a cosmopolitan city. There were many people, probably some with different backgrounds. But we can say that there's extreme diversity in the case of these 7 individuals. Not surprisingly, these lineages, most of them have been reported from multiple populations of the Middle East before. So many people today belong to these lineages. A couple of these, however, especially X2P, are extremely rare. So maybe only a dozen or 2 dozen individuals so far, contemporary individuals, have been reported to belong to this haplogroup. So in other words, some of these haplogroups now are extremely rare, at least to the best of our knowledge, while the other ones are quite common and widespread. The results of the Y chromosome genetics, which represents paternal lineages. So we have that for 3 male individuals from those 7 that we included in this study. Again, 3 different individuals, 3 different lineages. Interestingly, one of the 3 individuals belongs to R1b subclade, which is very common in most parts of Europe, but also interestingly, and this is results of my unpublished study as well, somewhere between 45 to 50% of contemporary Assyrians belong to one of the lineages of R1b. I know multiple individuals here who have got tested, and they actually belong to this lineage. The other individual belongs to T1a. All I can tell you is that T1a is also well known to be either from a Mesopotamian origin or at least having a deep history in Mesopotamia. It could be from the Levant or Anatolia as well. And a third individual, of course, who we can identify as what we call a Levant outlier, by which we mean, while the other 6 individuals are less or more similar, clustered together, this individual clusters more closely with some individuals from ancient Israel, Palestine, Jordan. So it seems like maybe that individual had an ancestry that came from the Levant instead of the other, versus the other individuals who look more like perhaps they were from Mesopotamia in origin. I'm just showing you this image because I'm considering including some image similar to this in the publication. So this is the map of the Halsey Gate, the skeletal remains as they were found, and basically those points with information about lineages of those individuals. A couple more minutes and then I'm going to conclude. But one other thing that I can share with you today is about testing relatedness and kinship between these individuals. So, in other words, looking into the genetics to see if anyone here are relatives. Do we have parents and children? Do we have cousins, even 2nd or 3rd cousins? Interestingly, there is no indication of any relatedness between these individuals. So up to 4th degree, there is no relationship. What does that mean? Of course, it means that there are no family members. And this is kind of important to know because 4 of these 7 individuals were children. So those males, those adults accompanied them at the site. Many of them seems to be guards or military men. It seems like they were not related, so there was no members of family. So those children perhaps were caught up in the middle of this, chaos and mayhem at the time when the city was being attacked. So it's really interesting from an archaeological and historical context, and it kind of goes very well with what you would imagine. Basically a moment of chaos with defendants, including these individuals, which almost certainly were trying probably to flee, but the invaders didn't let them leave, and in fact they were caught in the middle, and as gate was attacked, and it basically collapses and burns down, and those individuals die at the site of the gate. Just one last piece, again these are preliminary, but also to kind of further introduce to you the complex nature of these kind of studies, is we can do what we call modelings of the sources of populations. I'm sure that we all are interested to know, so what does the ancestry of those ancient Ninevites look like? Well, I don't have quite the answer yet, but I'm showing this image to share with you that when we compare them and use a modeling, using the Ninevites and other ancient individuals from the Near East, the best modeling that works so far is when we consider these individuals being 75 to 80% shared ancestry, if you will, or sources of ancestry, with people of Iron Age Armenia or the late Bronze Age site of Hasanlu, which probably many of you know is in Urmia region. And about a quarter, the remaining quarter of the genetics seems to share its ancestry with some individuals that we have discovered in early Bronze Age Jordan. But what does it all mean? So, as I said earlier, paleogenomics is very exciting, but also I'd like you to think about that as something in parallel with linguistics, perhaps even more so archaeology. So archaeologists use artifacts to tell us things about past. Now imagine if you can genetic information from individuals and use it as data points to do something similar. You can look into the interactions of populations, movements of individuals, and so on. But what is important to understand is that it's easy to confuse the genetic results with identity, right? And I'm really hoping that, everyone remembers that, we shouldn't read too much into these results. After all, we first of all don't know exactly, in this case or in any case when we are looking into the remains of an ancient individual, we can hardly be sure what they identified as, right? Sometimes we have artifacts that help with us, but we are not sure exactly what those certain individuals would identify as. More importantly, the genetics changes, like I said, for so many reasons. Our identities, our ethnic, our linguistic, our religious identities are really quite separate from our genomics. And I personally think that there is no relation between that. So in other words, when sometimes someone asks me, okay, I did this testing and I'm not sure the testing says something that doesn't say that I'm Assyrian, so am I not Assyrian? So I want to remind us that, our genetic testing, it shouldn't, it's a matter of curiosity. It's great, I'm curious myself, but I don't think we should ever draw on genetic results to infer things about one's identity. So commercial ancestry tests, of course, like I said, kind of helps us, in the sense that they provide us some curious results. Nevertheless, they could be problematic. The truth is that it's a business, right? So they are selling a product, and therefore they are commercializing this concept of genomic identity. And I would like to kind of caution us that, we shouldn't read too much into that. I'm not saying don't do it, it's a matter of curiosity, it's up to you. I haven't done it myself, honestly. But nevertheless, whatever the results are, it's just telling you about your biological history, which could be quite separate from your otherwise history, right? More importantly, and finally, I want to remind us that what you see as your genomic results represents you as a biological organism. So your genetic ancestry goes back tens of thousands of years, right? So there is no form of identity that you can think of, including your linguistic identity, your religious identity, your ethnic identity. At most, they go back 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, rarely so, but your genetic identity is something that goes back by tens of thousands of years. Therefore, again, not surprisingly, everyone that comes from northern Mesopotamia is likely to share a lot of genetics that goes from before they were distinguished as different ethnic or otherwise, groups, including, let's say, Assyrians versus other people native to northern Mesopotamia. So, and finally, a reminder that, everyone, including us, have the right to self-identification. So, you are who you are in terms of your identity. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Forgive me, I'm not lecturing to you. I'm just saying that from a genetic perspective, I'm confirming the well-known fact that we should do so. And it's a complete separation of genetics and other forms of identity. That's all. Thank you.
I don't know why, but those whose name is Michel, they do always exotic issues within our conferences. Our Michael Gabbara, our other Michael Gabbara are doing a huge job, complementing our linguistic, historical issues that we are dealing with. I'm thankful to you for this excellent exposition conference. That somehow I was thinking, and what's about those mountains where we were totally isolated, and if you go back 10 or probably I don't know how many thousands of years back, how is our combination as Assyrians? I would love to have such a work for our next volume. By the way, I'm going to use the occasion to ask you to send me as soon as possible let's say the work of these conferences, and then I will come back to your discussion in order to be published. Please don't forget that. Now we have time to also for some questions. We are on time, so if there are questions, comments, please, now the time is of the audience. Professor Jeffrey Khan.
Thank you very much, Michal. We've had some long conversations in the coffee breaks, and I've been the presentation. But just a note of clarification.
Just put horizontal, yeah, that way, please, yeah.
Towards the beginning, you gave a slide showing, I wasn't sure what period, sort of a pretty ancient period of a clustering of Assyrian and Armenian sort of genetics. But then, is it the case that when you get to, say, the Iron Age, is it the case when you get to the Iron Age that are you saying that essentially the really radical to distinguish Armenian, northern Mesopotamian, and Western Iranian is essentially the, although at an earlier period in the sort of the Paleolithic period there was, by the Iron Age really these so-called
right.
to distinguish.
Right.
Yeah, just to clarify, so there wasn't specifically a Armenian Assyrian clustering at
Right. As for the first part, yes. Again, somewhat surprising, perhaps not. Ancient, especially Neolithic Armenia, or South Caucasus, I should say, in general, is more closely related to ancient or Neolithic Iran than other parts of the Middle East. So we seem to be looking into a continuum of Iran and Caucasus. For the second part, as you said, so yes, generally by time, and again, if you think about the fact that there has been more gene flow and basically more movements and basically mass movements of populations in many parts of the world, especially in the Near East, populations seem to start looking more and more similar. By Bronze Age, they become significantly similar. By Iron Age, even more so. But to your point about the time of the formation of many of these identities being late Bronze Age and Iron Age, right? So at that point, it seems like the genetics of these populations already becomes very similar to that of today. So it doesn't mean that the genetics of populations like Armenians and perhaps Assyrians, we don't know much about ancient Assyrians yet, it doesn't mean that it hasn't changed in the past 2,500 or 3,000 years, but the changes happened during this period is only a fraction of the change between, let's say, 8,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago. I hope that clarifies things a little bit.
Do we have other questions? I would ask a question, but I must admit that I'm totally ignorant in this field. But just, is the deportation process somehow important for defining these genetic processes or not?
Is what process?
Deportation. Many people were deported from one side to the other. Imagine from the current Syria, many Aramean states were deported to Ashur.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then from Samaria to Babylon.
Exactly.
Then from, let's say, from southeast of Turkey to the other places.
Exactly. So excellent question, and it's actually something that I'm hoping to kind of after these studies, I've been thinking about writing something about that. I'm going to use some specific examples to agree with you and say that the scale of some of these mass movements is very significant, especially in comparison with the populations at the time. So during like Mitanni period, for instance, right? So we do have sometimes specific numbers, let's say 7,500 individuals that were moved, the entire city was moved, a few hundred kilometers, right? So we knew that they went from somewhere into what is Armenia today, or the other way around. People that were basically forced, displaced during the ancient Assyrian times, sometimes that is like 1, 2, 3% of the total population that was moved. So of course that can have some major impact on that formation of these of population's genetics. And in fact, this might be, and I think that's the point that you were getting to, one of the mechanisms by which many of these populations during Bronze Age and after Bronze Age seems to become even more similar to each other, more of these forced intermingling of populations, perhaps.
Yeah, because as we know that after 200 years, the assimilation process is a reality, but then the genetics has many things to say and to do in this field in order to see how the connection, how the links between the different populations that were settled there has been really materialized. That would be a unique work probably to be published in order also to contribute to this discussion we have upon identity, language, and so on. Dr. Nicholas, and then we have a few minutes. First Dr. Nicholas, then Sare, and there was another one. Yeah.
My question is relating to the recent study that was done on different ethnic groups in northern Iraq, and it showed that Assyrians, out of the 5 population groups that were tested, the 86 Assyrian samples showed more evidence of being very endogamous and conservative because they had only 10 Y haplogroups, whereas others had 11 up to 15 or 16. So how do these haplogroups match up, like haplogroups that are found in modern Assyrian samples match up with the ancient DNA that you tested? Are there similarities in the haplogroups that are found? And I think you were talking a little bit about it.
Yes. So the question, I mean, the first part of what Nicholas is referring to, Dr. Algilu is referring to, is about another study that looked into 80-some individuals, from Iraq, Assyrians, but also other ethnic minorities from Iraq. And there are relatively fewer lineages among Assyrians, so suggests a little bit more, less diversity compared with the others. Nevertheless, it's still, there is some diversity, and basically all of those lineages are shared among all of those groups. But still, compared to, let's say, general population of Iraq or Turkey or Iran, we have less diversity. And I mean, our best guess, and I think it would make sense to all of us, is that while I am talking about not having clear borders distinguishing populations, but of course traditions, including cultural, religious, and linguistic traditions, limits, well, who marries who, right? So you have some level of people marrying within groups, which therefore leads to them being more similar to each other compared with the outside groups. The second part of the question was how those three haplogroups that I mentioned from ancient Nineveh compared to modern populations. So all three of them are found among modern Assyrians today. However, they also are found and that shouldn't surprise us again, because these lineages go back sometimes 5,000, 10,000 years ago. So anyone who was, from the general area of Mesopotamia and the surrounding might belong to them. Once this is completed, I will make sure that we kind of reflect on that, where, like, specifically what are the relationships between the ancient and modern populations in terms of the diversity of the lineages.
Sarah, please. We don't hear you.
You have to hold it.
Just stay off, bitte. Stay off.
I mean, we can hear you. So.
Bela Naka. Okay, thank you. My question is, what is the influence of extreme experiences of a folk or population on their genetic? Because I read that, for example, the Hebrew, the Jewish, the Holocaust they had in or was they experienced in Germany, and that it has influence on 7 generations epigenetic. Is it true? Can you tell us a little bit about our folk and the genocide, the influence, please?
Of course, yes. So
Thank you.
The question is about the concept of epigenetics. Epigenetics is different from genetics, very simply put, in the sense that while genetics is what we get from our parents, like each of us have half of our biological father, half of our biological mother, that's our genetics. Epigenetics does not carry like that, throughout all generations. It's a relatively new concept. It's basically, you can think of it as demarcations on your genes that are passed for a couple of generations. So now we know for sure that it could be passed on for 2 generations. There are some studies now that indicate that probably for 3 generations, but it's extremely doubted that could pass beyond that. So in other words, epigenetics are marked left on one's genetics that they can pass to their children and their grandchildren for sure. And that could be impacted by their life history. So if something extreme happens, like if you grew up during war, if you face a situation like the genocide, like Holocaust, if you grew up going through a famine when you were extremely malnourished, that would change one's epigenetics and therefore their children and probably their grandchildren epigenetics. But I'm not sure if we have any indication that it goes beyond that. There have been studies of the Holocaust actually victims. In fact, I have talked to a couple of other Assyrian scholars about the possibility of maybe studying epigenetics of Assyrians as well, just to see, if we will find any indications of changes that could be related to Saifu and Assyrian genocide. But that's an excellent question.
Last question.
Yeah, I don't need a microphone, I think. I have a question. How has DNA research contributed to reconstruct the origins and migration patterns of ancient? I don't know if you mentioned it or not earlier.
Right. No, I didn't mention much about that, but it kind of, you can imagine something that is to part the exchange that I had with Nicholas. So for instance, once you have some reference points of what were the lineages that existed, let's say for instance in Nineveh 2,600 years ago, correct? And in some other parts of, let's say, ancient Assyria, but more importantly perhaps during historical period, right? Let's say from 1,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago, or 500 years ago. And then compare it with the contemporary individuals. You can imagine that we can kind of like link these data points. And for instance, well, you know, a good question would be, let's say people from Hakkari, right? Are they going to be less or more similar to the ancient people from Nineveh compared with people who live closer to Nineveh today? Does that make sense? So in other words, you will need to have the data points both from ancient and modern individuals, and in comparison, you can perhaps reconstruct some of those gene flows which would represent people's movements and migration. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. I think we are going to conclude this first session, or the morning session. I'm thankful to you, Michel Chamoun, for this excellent conference. We have learned a lot, and this also gives a new also branch of research within the Nineveh Chair and other associations that can contribute, enlightening, shedding light upon those aspects that are still, you know, needing a deep study. Thank you. Just a huge catch to him. Thank you very much. Now, before leaving, please, just practical questions. We are going to have lunch at the restaurant San Polo.
We